today. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda. That's the debate on cases of breaches of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. Rule 135. The first debate is that on Uganda, the arrest of parliamentarians from the opposition, and I'd like to welcome Ms Mogherini, who's with us for this debate. Our first speaker is Mr Tannock.
Mr President, it's unclear exactly what happened on the 13th of August this year in a northwest province of Uganda during political campaigning for a by-election. President Museveni's vehicle was indeed attacked, but lethal force was used against protesters. Opposition politicians such as Robert Kyagulanyi were detained and allegedly even tortured. But this lack of clarity over the facts does not mask the definite rising of concern expressed over increased repression of the political opposition in Uganda. The deterioration of fundamental freedoms of expression, assembly and association in Uganda is indeed worrying, as are President Museveni's efforts now to entrench his power by changing the law allowing a president to hold office over the age of 75. Over the next 3 years, before the elections in 2021, the international community must watch closely and call on the Museveni government to investigate all human rights abuses, uphold the rule of law and freedom of speech, and to fight hard to prevent election fraud and corruption. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Haybuch.
Thank you very much, President. Do we really want to be partners in crime? Because that's what we become if we remain silent. If members of parliament, if journalists are put behind bars, if they are beaten in detention and tortured and abuses of human rights, if this happens, then we as Greens cannot accept this. It has to be stopped. We as Greens stand at the side of Bobi Wine. He's not just an opposition leader, he's a figurehead for young people. He teaches democracy and peace to them. He fights for human rights. And his voice cannot be silenced. We demand the release of the prisoners. We demand an investigation into the incident and criminal procedures against those culpable, including the police. In cooperation development with Uganda, we have to look at their own Human Rights Commission that they have established and support it so that it does not remain a paper tiger. We have an opportunity to exert pressure, and we must exert pressure. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Kienge.
Thanks, Ms Kienge. Thank you, Mr President. If Uganda is showing that it is a country that will receive refugees, 1.4 million refugees are there today, but we still can't close our eyes to events which undermine human rights. There's now the law of not allowing people over the age of 65 to stand in presidential elections, and President Museveni's been in office since 1986, and despite the fact that he's older than the law permits, he's going to stand in the next elections as well. And violence has broken out all over Uganda because of this, and the police have been at the centre of violence in political demonstrations and debates, and the arrest of Bobi Wine and other parliamentarians from the opposition can't be neglected. People have been injured and have even died. This is an attack on the freedom of expression, and we can't allow fundamental rights to be threatened by violence. I do hope that Bobi Wine makes a quick recovery. Thank you, President.
Gracias, señora Sánchez.
Thanks, Ms Sanchez.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr President. On the 13th of August this year, the army and police of Uganda arrested 4 members of the opposition parliament, at least 2 journalists and 29 people before local elections. They were also beaten up. The lawyers of the accused were told that those detained were tortured while in detention. This quite clearly underscores the violations of freedom of association and freedom of expression in Uganda. But President Museveni, who's been in power since 1986, who's been accused of rigged elections, still enjoys substantial Western support. Previously, he was supported for fighting jihadi terrorism, now also for delivering on our migratory policy objectives. In other words, Uganda does our dirty work, keeps out Congolese and Somali refugees who are fleeing war and misery. That's why they're partners. The EU is being inconsistent. The EU must condemn the authoritarian state and stand by fundamental freedoms and human rights once and for all. Thank you.
Señor Zeller.
Thank you, Mr. Zeller.
Thank you very much, President. Uganda is essential for the stability in Central Eastern Africa. Uganda is involved in peace maintenance missions in Africa. They're taking refugees from Congo and from South Sudan. They're an important partner for Europe. It's all the more worrying then, given the situation as well. Since 1986, President Museveni has been ruling with an iron hand, and given the limitations on age, he is nevertheless applying to stand for election. The dissatisfaction amongst others with young people, who constitute 3/4 of the population, i.e. under 30 years, is problematic. And seeing the young singer Bobi Wine coming into action, who is a serious opponent to Museveni, where there were opposition candidates put up, some of them even won office. Now the Museveni regime, prior to the elections, we saw in the actions and during the campaign, the driver Bobi Wine was assassinated and people have been driven from the country and thrown into prison. The incidents in August have to be investigated. Democratic development is what needs to be supported by us.
Gracias, señor Zeller. Señor.
Thank you, Ms. Schaka.
Thank you, President, High Representative and colleagues. The arrests of Ugandan opposition politicians, as well as of commitment of serious human rights violations, such as extrajudicial killings, the excessive use of force, were actually reason for the UN High Commissioner to call for an independent investigation and to ask for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. And this House today echoes that call. We also urge the respect for the independence of parliamentarians. I think that is vital for the future of Uganda, as well as respect of the freedom of expression and to respect the role of an independent media. All our EU programs are conditional upon the respect for human rights, and I think we should not hesitate to use that leverage also when it comes to Uganda, in order to stand for our principles and to stand with the people in Uganda who are worried, such as the Human Rights Commission there as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Señor.
Thank you, Mr. Preda. Thank you, President. Let me begin by welcoming the High Representative to our discussion. Let me just say that today's debate about Uganda was the idea of my political group. I think that as MPs, we can't remain indifferent when elected members are arrested in such worrying conditions. The freedom to exercise one's mandate as elected MP, Parliament's independence, are crucial elements of a democratic society. That's not happening in Uganda, where opposition members have been regularly intimidated, and the arrest of Bobi Wine and 3 colleagues is just the most recent example of this. We need to condemn in the strongest terms and insist that the trumped-up accusations are dropped. Since we have development cooperation with Uganda, I think we do have the chance to put effective pressure on them and improve the situation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Benifei. Thank you, President. President Museveni has been repressing the opposition for many, many years. Activists, young Democrats Brenda Nambukena. There's all sorts of other activists who have been arrested and tortured over the years. Now we see the shocking Bobby Wine case and the arrest of journalists and a further worsening of the state of law and democracy. We need to act, and we need to act now. We have European programs which apply here. I'm thinking about development cooperation, budgetary assistance. These things should genuinely be conditioned on respect for human rights. Europe can't be an indirect accomplice for the ongoing and growing abuses of ordinary people and democracy in Uganda. Thank you, President.
Gracias, señor Corrao.
Thank you, Mr. Corrao.
Sì, grazie Presidente.
Thank you, President. The right to demonstrate and the right of free association are at the base of any democracy. But the Ugandan government doesn't seem to agree. We see beatings, shootings, tortures of opposition members and over 30 other people. This is a country where arrests of the opposition are the rule rather than the exception. We need to tackle this at the root, colleagues. We've got a president, we've got a government that violates the independence and prerogatives of Parliament. It goes far beyond simple civil rights violations. It's an attack on the rule of law itself. The right of freedom of expression and association have been violated, and Europe needs to make certain that Uganda restores these rights. We are providing development aid and budget support programs to strengthen the rights of human and civil rights in Uganda. We should make certain that they really are applied.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to the High Representative. And now, Mr. Colombier from the ENF Group.
La procédure de jugement dans
the courts martial used against opposition members in Uganda must make us question whether there's rule of law there. Now, if they'd committed crimes, they should go to civil courts. The same obtained for opposition politicians. They were detained during the campaign and allegedly tortured. This is scandalous. But is the European Parliament genuinely able to lecture others on rule of law? Hungary, which has a sovereign people, managed to claw back its freedom from communism, but here in this chamber its sovereignty was attacked. Ditto Poland. Brussels leaders point the finger at them, and they have no legitimacy, and they just get money from Soros and others. Now, these countries have quite clearly democratically elected their leaders, but can we really criticize Uganda? The only democracy is based on universal suffrage and respect of sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Svoboda.
Vážený pane předsedající.
Mr. Chair, Mr. High Representative, governments of many countries are applying certain procedures when it comes to the opposition that violate human rights. Uganda is one of those countries. It's an almost standard set of steps. First, the opposition is being intimidated, then some people are being murdered, then there are false fabricated accusations, they are illegally detained, and they may even be tortured, and then they are accused of high treason only because they criticize the government of the country. Journalists are often arrested after a demonstration has come to an end, and they were present at this demonstration as the press corps. That is why we must point out that we will not tolerate any violations of human rights, and if the conduct of Ugandan government does not change, the EU should only target their help to those who are keeping to the state and to the laws.
Dziękuję bardzo. Przechodzimy do formuły.
Thank you so much. And now catch the eye, and the first would be Mr. José Ignacio Faria.
Thanks, Mr. President. High Representative, the attack on Bobi Wine has been something which has led to protests which in turn have been repressed. We need to make certain this is investigated. Once again, we're talking about the question of fundamental freedoms in Uganda, and the regime is continuing to allow attacks on its own people, even the murders of children in ritual activities and the repression of homosexuality. We need to give a clear signal, Madam High Representative. We need to call for the freeing of anybody who's been arrested and imprisoned from the opposition. Increase the pressure on the Museveni regime so that he honours his commitment to international law and freedom of expression and association and meeting, and respects the rule of law and human rights. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And now Mr. Juan Fernando López Aguilar.
Presidente, Comisaria Mogherini.
Commissioner, Ms. Mogherini, in the State of the Union speech, President Juncker underlined the importance of EU's foreign policy, but that can't undermine our commitment to the rule of law and democracy. Uganda has been praised for cooperation on migratory issues, but that doesn't mean we can turn a blind eye to authoritarian drift and a reformed constitution which allows Museveni to be re-elected forever. I mean, he's been in power for 38 years. He is competing with Guinea and other countries and their autocrats. He's having opposition politicians that are critical arrested, and likewise journalists. And this, of course, includes Bobi Wine, a musician who's also a politician, who was tortured and detained when he was trying to go to the United States to try to get the kidney damage he'd suffered cured. This is a country which still criminalizes sexual orientation, so we need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sean Kelly.
Thank you, President. I agree with my colleagues with regard to this report. We cannot put up with what is going on in Uganda. There is no freedom. We have a dictator in place. He's been there for many years. He doesn't want there to be an opposition or anyone speaking out against him. Anyone who does so is put in prison. It's the exact same with the press. Therefore, as my friend Swoboda said, we have to look at the development cooperation that we and the money that we give to Uganda, and this has to be conditioned to respect of human rights and democracy. Therefore, it is very important that we look at this and maybe even pull back a bit in our aid to Uganda until they respect human rights and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Christian Furunzulika.
Bardzo dziękuję, Panie President. Dear colleagues, High Representative, I share the opinion that it is vital for the Ugandan democracy to ensure the independence of the Parliament as an institution and the independence of the mandate of its members, while ensuring free pursuit of their mandates. Moreover, I support the call to launch a prompt, independent, impartial and effective investigation into the killing of Mr. Karvuma and into reports of deaths and excessive use of force during the protests. The authorities should guarantee, protect and promote fundamental rights, including the civil and political rights of its citizens, such as freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And allow me to praise also the High Representative position on this subject. And I take this opportunity, in this room, in this chamber, to praise you, High Representative, for your hard work and for your smart work in order to enhance the influence of the European Union and to make the European Union more visible within the international affairs. Mille grazie.
Dziękuję bardzo. Skończyliśmy wystąpienia.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to High Representative Commissioner Mogherini.
Let me start with something that doesn't relate directly to the issue we discuss today, because every month we meet to discuss about human rights violations and to take action. And I think it is important for me to say a few words on the system that we have built together to assess human rights violations and ensure accountability, bring the perpetrators to justice. Because today the existence of the International Criminal Court is being questioned, and I think it is important to say in this hemicycle, formally and clearly, that it is not questioned by the European Union and that we will continue to strongly and fully support the ICC and its work. Thank you. I know that this is the strong position of this Parliament, of all our member states, because we remember very well when 20 years ago in Rome, finally the statute of the ICC was ratified. We remember very well that after Rwanda and the war in the Balkans, the world needed real change, and we all know that the International Criminal Court has brought that change. It has strengthened universal justice beyond power politics and beyond geopolitical interests. It has made clear that justice is not an enemy of reconciliation, but rather the contrary. It is the basis for reconciliation. And when the victims feel powerless, when crimes are met with impunity, that reconciliation is much harder to achieve. And that accountability is essential to build the foundations for peace. So the court may not be perfect, but the best way forward for us is not to dismantle our global institutions. The way forward for us is to make them stronger and to build a strong, more effective multilateral system. And this is why, once again, I want to state it very clearly and very strongly in this room, this is why the European Union will continue to be a strong supporter of the ICC, and I count on your support in this work that is ahead of us in this field. Coming to the issue we're discussing on this point of the agenda, on the 13th of August, as most of you have mentioned, at least 35 people were arrested in the Arua district in the northwest of Uganda immediately before a local by-election. Among the people arrested were also 4 members of the parliament belonging to the opposition, and in the following days various Ugandan sources reported brutal treatment inflicted to the detainees by security forces, including members of parliament. The European Union delegation and member states' ambassadors on the ground followed the situation extremely closely and issued a joint statement on the 17th of August calling upon all forces in Uganda to respect the rule of law and individual rights. We got the authorization by the military authorities. Our delegation and European ambassadors could visit 2 of them, Bobi Wine in the military barracks where he was detained, and also Francis Zak in the hospital where he was undergoing treatment. Both members of the parliament had several wounds and needed comprehensive medical treatment. In that perspective, they were eventually authorised to leave the country at the beginning of September. However, they are still facing treason charges. An investigation on the alleged abuses has been launched by the police. The Speaker of the Parliament decided to set up an ad hoc committee in order to deal with this issue. Finally, a report of the Ugandan Human Rights Commission is also expected, and we will wait for the conclusions of these investigations. But let me state once again very clearly that security forces have a duty to respect everyone's freedom to peacefully demonstrate for their opinions. The allegations of torture are serious, and if confirmed, perpetrators must be prosecuted and victims must obtain redress. Uganda has unfortunately a long history of violence and conflict, and we know very well that its people deserve some peace and the right to peacefully express their opinion. We've made this position very clear to the Ugandan government, and we will continue to engage so that responsibilities can be established and perpetrators are brought to justice. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani Mogherini.
Thank you very much. I have received 4 draft resolutions to conclude this debate. The vote will take place later. And now we move on to the next topic. Myanmar and Burma, in particular the case of journalists Wa Lone Ikiao So O. We will start with the authors.